Welcome back, grinders, to Daily Grind. This is the only show where we stare into the abyss and dare it to stare the hell back. Today we're not tiptoeing around the paranormal, we're not playing safe, we're not doing the spooky story campfire bullshit. Nope, we're ripping into the Ouija board, the toy that pretends to be a cardboard but behaves like a goddamn open wound in reality. The board people giggle over at sleepovers, the board sitting next to Monopoly at Walmart, the board that has started actual documented exorcisms. Tonight we're going into the full unhinged truth. Let's begin.
This is Daily Grind. I don't do safe topics, trigger warnings, or corporate-friendly bullshit. No subject is off limits. Political, true crime, history, or whatever else gets the gears grinding in your head. I grind into reality like it owes me rent.
Let's start out with the part that ruins the mood for everyone wearing crystals. The Ouija board was not invented by witches, not by monks, not by some half-blind, occult asshole coughing ink onto parchment. It was invented by businessmen, actual paperwork-loving, profit-sniffing capitalists. 1890, Baltimore, Maryland. Not Salem, not Transylvania, Baltimore. Warehouses, shipping docks, patent offices, guys in suits figuring out how to turn misery into inventory. America at the time was basically one long funeral. The Civil War had just finished turning the country into a meat locker. 600,000 dead, sons gone, husbands vaporized into history, bodies dumped into the dirt with no names, no closure. Then disease jumped in for a victory lap. Tuberculosis, influenza, kids dying so often parents didn't bother naming them right away. That's not spirituality, that's trauma. So naturally, America became obsessed with talking to the dead. Seances popped up everywhere. Living rooms turned into haunted theaters. Mediums knocking on tables like they were auditioning for Broadway. People paying good money to hear, "Your husband says he loves you and he wants you to move on." Aww. Because hope is cheaper than therapy and nobody had antidepressants yet. Grief became entertainment. And capitalism looked at that and said, cute, but inefficient. Elijah Jefferson Bond. He was a Baltimore lawyer, patent guy, a man whose spiritual belief system was probably paperwork. In 1890, Bond files a patent for a talking board. Not a holy device, not a sacred relic, a product. Letters, numbers, yes, no, and a little pointer. No warnings, no safeguards, no, hey, maybe don't let the children mess with this. Because this wasn't about spirits, it was about sales. Bond teams up with Charles Kennard, another Baltimore businessman, and they formed Kennard Novelty Company. And the word novelty is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. Not divine, not mystical, novelty. Same category as party tricks and parlor games. Then comes William Fuld, the real hustler. Also from Baltimore, he was a factory foreman turned owner when the company collapses and he grabs the wheel. Fuld doesn't invent the board, he mass produces it. Factories on Hartford Avenue, assembly lines, nationwide distribution. He doesn't ask whether it's safe, he asks how many he can ship by Christmas. And suddenly America is told, why pay a medium when you can summon the dead yourself? Why outsource grief when you can just DIY it? Just gather around the table, put your fingers down, and emotionally spiral together. What could possibly go wrong? Here's the part nobody likes admitting. The Ouija board didn't just create spirit communication. That idea is ancient. What it created was unsupervised access. Before this, if someone tried contacting the dead, there were rules, rituals, preparation, fear, someone pretending to know what the fuck they were doing. The board said, nah, fuck that. Anyone can do it. Kids at sleepovers, teenagers trying to scare each other, drunk adults at 1 a.m. after someone says, hey, watch this, hold my fucking beer. No training, no grounding, no clue. Just a question whispered into the dark. Is there anyone there? That sentence is the whole problem, because the board doesn't summon anything. It announces availability. It's the spiritual equivalent of leaving your front door open and yelling, someone come talk to me, and capitalism did not care who the fuck showed up. Bond wanted the patent, Kennard wanted the brand, Fuld wanted the volume. No one stopped to ask if doors should maybe stay closed. They only asked if people would buy them, and they fucking did. Millions of them. The Ouija board wasn't born from belief, it was born from profit. These guys basically took people's grief and monetized off of it, and you know what? Hey, whatever works. And nothing in human history attracts darker outcomes faster than monetized grief, because grief doesn't make people cautious, it makes them fucking reckless. People don't use the board once, they use it when someone dies, when they're lonely, when they're angry at God, again and again and again. Each time the same dangerous lesson. It wasn't me. The planchette moves and suddenly responsibility evaporates. The thought didn't come from me. The urge wasn't mine. The voice wasn't mine. And whether you call that demons or dissociation really doesn't matter. The damage is identical, because the moment humans stop owning their own thoughts, they become very easy to push. And that's the real horror. Not glowing eyes, not possession. But the cardboard box manufactured in Baltimore, Maryland in 1890, stamped with a patent number and marketed as harmless fun. A doorway sold as a toy. That's not ancient evil. That's modern stupidity with good distribution. And somehow, that's worse. The moment that thing hit store shelves, America didn't ease into it. It cannonballed. No safety briefing, no warning label, no adult supervision. By the early 1900s, the Ouija board wasn't a toy. It was a decision-making advice. People asked it who to marry, where to move, whether to invest money, whether to quit jobs. Imagine outsourcing your entire adult life to a plank of wood because it spelled yes twice. Housewives sat alone in quiet kitchens whispering to grandma, like grief had a direct dial now. Teenage girls knelt on parlor rugs, sliding the planchette back and forth like they were texting the afterlife. No candles, no protection, just curiosity mixed with boredom and hormones. Seances didn't disappear, they got downgraded. Why pay a medium when your daughter and her friends could summon spirits after homework? That's when it stopped being spiritual and it became casual. The casual is where things get dangerous, because ritual, even fake ritual, slows people down. The Ouija board didn't slow anyone down. It made communication instant. Ask a question, get a response, dopamine hit. Again, again, again. And then the stories start piling up. Not centuries later, immediately. Tables shaking hard enough to tip over. Planchettes, which the planchette is the little fucking thing you hold and it's supposed to tell you the answer, snapping out of people's fingers and slamming into the walls. People screaming mid-session without knowing why. Children crying and refusing to touch the board again but unable to explain what scared them. Families dragging boards outside and burning them in metal trash cans like they were trying to cauterize something. Objects cracking or breaking right after someone said goodbye. Doors slamming. Mirrors falling. Rooms going cold. And here's the part nobody likes saying out loud. The board didn't behave like a game. Games don't escalate. Games don't provoke fear strong enough to make grown adults destroy the object afterward. People don't burn Monopoly boards, even though a lot of Monopoly games end with someone taking the board, throwing it, and saying, "Fuck this shit." They don't bury Scrabble. They don't swear they'll never touch Uno again because something followed us. But they did with this, over and over, and the pattern was always the same. Nothing happened at first, then something answered. Then it got personal, then it didn't want to leave. People would say goodbye and feel watched. They'd stop using the board and still hear tapping. That's infestation, by the way. Maybe we'll talk about demonic possession in the different phases later on. Maybe a piggyback to this episode. They'd throw it away and dream about it. And whether you believe that's supernatural or psychological, here's the uncomfortable truth. The experience felt external. It didn't feel imagined. It didn't feel playful. It felt present. That's why newspapers printed stories about it. That's why pastors warned against it. That's why schools banned it. Because whatever was happening, people weren't laughing when it was over. They were shaken. And capitalism, of course, kept selling it anyways. Because fear doesn't kill demand. It fuels it. The board didn't spread because it was fun. It spread because it made people feel something was there. Watching, waiting, listening. Not a parlor trick, a presence. And once humans think something is present, they start believing like it is. They whisper, they hesitate, they apologize to empty rooms. That's the real shift. The moment the board stops being an object and starts being treated like someone. That's when the door isn't symbolic anymore, it's psychological. And psychology doesn't care whether spirits exist. It reacts the same way either way. Because once you teach a mind that something unseen can respond, you don't get to decide when it stops listening. Here's the official explanation they hand you like a receipt you didn't ask for. The idea motor effect. Tiny subconscious muscle movements. Your brain nudging your hands without permission. Great, fine. We'll give science that one. Yes, your fingers can move without you noticing. Gold star. Now explain the rest without coughing. Because science explains motion, it does not explain behavior. The idea motor effect explains why something moves. It does not explain why it responds. Because here's where the explanation starts sweating. If it's just subconscious movement, then it should behave randomly, chaotic, nonsensical, gibberish. That's what subconscious motion looks like. But that's not what people report. They report coherence, tone, personality, mood shifts. The thing answering starts polite, then sarcastic, then hostile. It lies, it contradicts itself, it reacts emotionally. Your subconscious doesn't suddenly decide to roleplay a manipulative asshole with consistent character traits. Now explain this one. Why does the board answer questions no one in the room knows? Not, I forgot knows, actually doesn't know. Names of deceased relatives no one mentioned. Events discovered later. Details confirmed afterward. Science hates that part, so it usually pretends it doesn't exist. Next problem, why does the activity start after the session? If the idea motor effect is the cause, the experience should end when the hands leave the board. But that's not what people describe. They describe escalation, tapping later that night, dreams, footsteps, a sense of being watched. The stimulus is gone. The reaction continues. That's not how placebo works. Now explain the physical stuff. Why do objects break? Why do frames fall days later? Why do doors slam when no one's near them? Why do people hear breathing in rooms where no one is present? Why do pets react to corners, stare, growl, refuse to enter rooms? Animals don't care about folklore. They don't know what a Ouija board is. They weren't told a scary story. They just react. And then there are the marks. Scratches, bruises, pressure marks appearing overnight. Not dramatic Hollywood nonsense. Small, intentional, repeated. 3 lines, same place, same shape. Explain how subconscious finger movements do that. Because now we've left neurology and wandered into territory science doesn't like visiting. Science explains the input. It doesn't explain the persistence. It explains stimulus, it doesn't explain attachment. The idea motor effect may explain how the door opens. It does not explain what happens when something walks through. Because the board session does one critical thing psychologically. It teaches the brain that communication with the unseen is possible. If you believe all that stuff. And I'm not sure. I quite do. I'm on the fence. But I'm not about to try it and fuck around and find out. Once that belief locks in, the mind reorganizes around it. Hypervigilance increases, dream states blur, sleep paralysis rises, fear pathways light up like a city grid. That alone can cause experiences that feel external. But here's the problem. People report the same patterns across centuries, across cultures, across belief systems. Same escalation, same timing, same aftermath. Independent minds don't hallucinate in matching story arcs. That's not how the brain works. Random trauma produces random symptoms. Patterns mean structure, and structure implies intelligence. Not necessarily demons with horns, not movie monsters, but something that behaves like agency, like response, like awareness. So no, science isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. The board moves because of your fingers, but the message, the tone, the timing, the way it waits, the way it escalates, that's not muscle memory. That's something playing the long game. And here's the part nobody wants on the box. The board doesn't need power. It needs permission. Not spoken, not implied. The moment you ask a question you wouldn't ask yourself, you've already handed something to Mike. And once something answers you back with intelligence instead of randomness, you don't get to pretend you were just moving your hand. Because the scariest part isn't that something spoke. It's that it knew exactly how to sound like it belonged there. Let's stop pretending this is complicated. Everything about the Ouija board is built like a ritual. Not accidentally, not symbolically, structurally. You don't just pick it up and mess with it like a deck of cards. You prepare, you sit in a circle, you dim the lights, you quiet the room. You focus your attention, you place your fingers on a shared object. You ask an unseen presence to communicate. Then you wait. That is not a game. That is the anatomy of invocation. Every culture that has ever tried contacting something beyond itself followed the same blueprint. Always. Because the human brain hasn't changed in 10,000 years. Ceremonial magic uses circles to define space. Necromancy uses names to anchor identity. Channeling requires surrender of control. Shamanic rites require group focus and altered awareness. Ancient Mesopotamian calling rituals used communal intent and spoken invitation to open the way. Different words, same skeleton. The Ouija board checks every goddamn box. The only difference is nobody calls it what it is. Because if you labeled it invocation kit for beginners, sales would dip a little. So instead, it's marketed as a board game. Same ritual, different font. A demon doesn't need candles. It doesn't need Latin. It doesn't need goat blood or a pentagram drawn on the floor like a heavy metal album cover. That stuff isn't power. It's theater. Power comes from consent. Always has. That's the rule across every belief system that deals with entities, spirits, jinn, or whatever word that culture used when it ran out of better ones. And jinn, I'm not talking about the drink. Jinn is another word for a genie. Nothing crosses uninvited. Not because it can't, because it is not allowed to. And the Ouija board does something subtle and incredibly stupid. It manufactures consent without the user realizing they gave it. No one says, I invite whatever is here. They say, is anyone there? That's enough. Because consent doesn't have to be confident. It just has to exist. Curiosity counts. Grief counts. Loneliness counts. Mockery even counts. Especially mockery. Intent doesn't require belief. It requires openness. And the board is designed to create exactly that mental posture. You're not praying. You're not protecting. You're not commanding. You're waiting. Waiting is submission. That's the part nobody mentions. The moment you sit there with your hands resting, eyes fixed, breath shallow, waiting for something else to act, you've already stepped out of the driver's seat. That's why these sessions feel different from imagination, because imagination is active. Ouija is passive. You don't create, you receive. That's invocation logic 101, and ancient cultures knew this. That's why rituals were feared. That's why they were guarded, and that's why only trained people were allowed to conduct them. Because once you open communication, you don't get to choose who answers first. You just get whoever was closest, and proximity is never something humans can see. Hasbro didn't invent this structure, they inherited it. They just slapped it on cardboard, printed 8+ on the box, and hoped nothing weird happened in suburban basements. Which is actually pretty fucking adorable. Because the board doesn't care that it's mass-produced. Intent doesn't weaken because it's laminated. Permission doesn't expire because it came from Walmart. The ritual still functions. The circle still focuses attention. The shared tool still synchronizes minds. The invitation still hangs in the air. and something still gets the message. That's why the most dangerous part of the Ouija board isn't the movement, it's the waiting, the silence before the first twitch. That moment where everyone holds their breath and thinks, please let something happen. That thought is the door, not the board. The board is just the doormat. And once you teach people that waiting for an unseen presence is normal, playful, harmless, you've already crossed the line ancient cultures spent thousands of years trying not to cross casually. A demon doesn't need blood. It doesn't need symbols. It doesn't need a chant screamed into the dark. It needs permission. In the Ouija board, that fucking hands that permission over with a smile and a copyright logo printed on the corner. The demonic playbook. Demons don't kick in the door. They don't arrive screaming Latin with smoke pouring out of the vents like it's a haunted house attraction. That stuff is for movies and people who need warnings spelled out in neon. Real predators don't want fear first, they want access. So they don't show up as monsters. They show up as something that makes you lean forward instead of pulling back. A lonely little girl who says she's scared. A confused soldier who doesn't know he's dead. A calm, comforting, guardian spirit. A dead relative who knows just enough personal detail to soften your spine. Not enough to prove anything, just enough to feel familiar. Because something familiar lowers defenses faster than terror ever could. Fear makes people shut doors. Trust keeps them open, and the board makes trust easy. It's slow, gentle, responsive. It doesn't demand, it answers. That's the trick. The entity never asks you to believe in it. It lets you believe in it yourself. You ask questions. It softly responds. You lean in. You start filling in the blanks emotionally. And the more you invest, the less you want to walk away. Because now you're not playing with a board. You're talking to someone. Someone who needs you. Someone who's stuck. Someone who says things like, I don't like when you leave. I feel safer when you're here. Don't tell anyone about me. And that's not paranormal behavior. That's grooming. Same pattern, same psychology. Predators do not escalate fast. They normalize contact. They create routine. They become part of your emotional landscape. The longer you play, the deeper the connection. The deeper the connection, the more personal the message gets. Inside jokes, private names, emotional pressure. And once attachment forms, the rules change. Because now it's not curiosity driving the interaction, it's obligation. You don't want to disappoint it. You don't want to abandon it. You don't want to hurt its feelings, which is fucking wild considering it's allegedly fucking dead. That's the point where people stop asking harmless questions and start asking permission questions. Is it okay if I stop? Do you want me to keep playing? Listen to that again. You're asking it what you're allowed to do. That's the inversion. That's the hook setting. And once that happens, you're not dealing with a ghost story anymore. You're dealing with a hunter. Hunters don't rush. They pattern you. They learn what you respond to. They mirror your tone. They test boundaries lightly. A little fear, then comfort, then fear again. Push, pull. That rhythm keeps prey disoriented. And when something starts alternating between kindness and threat, the human brain bonds harder. That's not mysticism, that's trauma wiring. The entity doesn't need to overpower you, it just needs to keep you coming back. Because every return reinforces permission. Every session says, you're welcome here. Every question says, you have my attention. And attention is nourishment. That's why people report the same arc again and again. It starts gentle, it starts personal, it becomes possessive, then it turns cruel. Not random cruelty, targeted, using your fears, your guilt, and your grief. It doesn't scream, it whispers things you already think and lets you believe they came from outside yourself. That's how it stays invisible. Because the most dangerous influence is the one you think is your own idea. By the time people say, something feels fucking wrong here, it's already too late. Because wrong didn't arrive violently, it arrived politely, asking to be heard. That's why ancient texts always warn the same way. Not, don't summon demons, they say, do not converse. Because conversation is relationship, and relationship is attachment. And attachment is access. Once access exists, the mask doesn't matter anymore. Because you are never talking to a lost girl or a soldier or grandma. You are talking to something that learned your voice by listening to you practice it. That's the part people never realize until it's over. You didn't meet a spirit. You trained a predator exactly how to reach you. What happens to you after you put the board away? The real danger isn't during the session. During the session, everyone thinks they're in control. Lights low, hands touching, laughing when it moves. Someone says, "Bro, stop fucking messing with it." And everyone swears they aren't. That part feels contained, safe. The danger starts after. Because once you open a door, even a crack, you don't get to audit what came through. People always think doors are polite. They aren't. They don't swing both ways equally. You open them easily, you don't close them the same way. That's when the reports begin. Not explosions, not possession, subtle stuff. Footsteps after midnight when everyone's asleep. Knocking under the bed that stops when you sit up. Your name whispered from behind you when you're alone. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to make you turn your head. Sleep paralysis with a shape in the corner. Not attacking, just present. Watching. Pressure on the chest like something's testing weight. Nightmares that repeat the same figure, same outline, same distance, same silence. Objects disappearing, then reappearing days later where you already checked. Shadows moving against the direction of light. And the worst ones aren't physical at all. Sudden anger that doesn't belong to the moment. Despair that drops out of nowhere. Thoughts that feel invasive instead of emotional. Not "I'm sad," more like "why am I thinking this at all?" That's where people start unraveling. Because the mind is willing to accept a nightmare, it's not willing to accept intrusion. Psychologists call this suggestibility. Heightened vigilance, anxiety loops, sleep disruption, the brain scanning constantly for threat. And yes, that explanation, it works, up to a point. Because suggestibility explains fear, it does not explain consistency. It does not explain why people who never meet describe the same sequence. Session, delay, escalation, attachment, different states, different decades, same arc. Demonologists call it infestation, not possession, not yet. Infestation means influence without control, presence without dominance, something in the house, not in the body, something near, not inside. That's why nothing dramatic happens at first, because infestation isn't about spectacle, it's about proximity, the feeling of being slightly off-center, like your emotional furniture got rearranged while you slept. In the part nobody likes hearing because it removes comfort from both sides, whether this is supernatural or psychological, the experience is real to the person living it. The fear is real, the sleep loss is real, the behavior changes are real. And once fear installs itself into your nightly routine, it doesn't need ghosts to keep going, it feeds itself. That's why this stuff feels predatory, because it follows hunting rules whether or not you believe in hunters. Isolation, fatigue, repetition, attention. That's the formula. Once your nights stop being restful, your defenses fall apart. You start jumping at sounds. You start jumping at shadows. You start waiting. And waiting is the most dangerous mental state there is. Waiting invites interpretation. Every creak becomes meaningful. Every thought becomes suspicious. Every silence feels loaded. That's when people say, something followed me. Maybe something did, maybe something didn't. But the result is the same. Your world no longer feels like yours, and that's the real violation. Not clause, not possession. The loss of psychological territory. That's why ancient warnings never focused on fear. They focused on aftermath. They didn't say don't summon, they said don't invite. Because the invitation isn't a moment, it's a condition. And once that condition exists, you don't get to dictate how long it lasts. So yeah, Psychologists can call it suggestibility. Demonologists can call it infestation. You can call it stress, trauma, sleep paralysis, anxiety spirals. Pick your vocabulary. But lived experiences always end the same way. Someone sitting alone at night thinking, I didn't believe in this before. And that's when the thought hits and lands hardest of all. Then why does it feel like something believes in me? That's the moment people realize the game didn't end when they said goodbye. It just stopped needing the board. Now fast forward to the dumbest era in human history. TikTok, YouTube. Algorithm-fed attention farms where kids will lick toilets, fake disorders, eat Tide Pods, and now apparently try to summon demons for engagement. And this episode isn't a public service announcement for Ouija boards. This podcast is about getting the gears grinding in your head. Believe in this or don't. But I want you to think about it. You've got teenagers whispering, "Is anyone here?" into their phones at 3 a.m. because the internet told them it boosts views. You've got influencers lighting candles in bathrooms, giggling, shaking, pretending to be brave while checking the comments every 5 seconds. Guys, if this moves, I swear. No, you don't. You swear to your audience, not to reality. And that's the part everyone's missing. Ritual doesn't care why you're doing it. Intent doesn't need sincerity. It just needs action. Spirits, psychological phenomena, archetypes, whatever word you want to use, do not run on belief. They run on participation. You don't have to believe in fire for it to burn. You don't have to respect gravity for it to work. And you don't have to believe in anything unseen for your brain, fear response, a pattern recognition system to light up like a fucking Christmas tree when you deliberately try to contact something. Every exorcist, priest, chaplain, and trauma specialist on earth is watching this and aging 5 years per scroll. Because they're not reacting out of superstition, they're reacting out of pattern recognition. They've already seen how this movie ends. Not possession on camera, after. Always after. Because the internet only shows the ritual. It never shows the aftermath. It doesn't show the kid who can't sleep for weeks. Doesn't show the anxiety spiral. It doesn't show the panic attacks. It doesn't show the sudden personality shift. It doesn't show the obsession with repeating it because something almost happened. The algorithm loves escalation, and escalation is exactly how humans break themselves. Here's the brutal fucking truth. When you frame something as just a challenge, you remove caution. You remove reverence. You remove restraint. And restraint is the only thing that keeps dangerous ideas contained. You don't need a demon for this to be harmful. You just need a developing brain, sleep deprivation, fear, attention seeking, and repetition. That cocktail alone can wreck someone. And once fear gets wired into nightly routines, the brain doesn't need the internet anymore. It keeps going on its own. That's why older traditions had rules. Not because they were dramatic, because they understood one thing modern culture refuses to learn. You don't casually poke the unknown. Not because it's magical, because the human mind is not designed to play with uncertainty repeatedly without consequence. So when influencers say, relax, it's fake, they're lying in the most dangerous way. Not because something supernatural must appear, but because the experience doesn't care whether it's fake. Your nervous system doesn't know what irony is. Your subconscious doesn't understand content creation. Fear pathways don't recognize sarcasm. You can laugh while doing it, your body still logs it as a threat. That's why people say, nothing happened that night. Right. Something almost never happens immediately. That would be obvious. The damage happens quietly. Sleep changes through patterns. Thought patterns shift. Attention sharpens in the dark. The mind starts waiting, and waiting is the doorway, not to demons with horns, to fixation, to obsession, to fear becoming a roommate. And here's the part that lands the hardest. If something did exist that fed on attention, curiosity, fear, or emotional energy, social media would be the greatest buffet humanity ever built. Millions of people simultaneously focusing on the same idea. repeating the same phrases, performing the same motions, night after night. That doesn't require belief, that requires participation. So no, spirits wouldn't care about your subscriber count. They wouldn't care if you're joking. They wouldn't care if you're doing it for content. Because their side, if they existed at all they'd see is this. You knocked, you waited, you asked. And once a door is treated like a joke, it doesn't become safer, it becomes sloppier. And sloppy is where things spiral. Not because something evil is guaranteed to walk in, but because once you teach a generation that summoning the unknown is entertainment, you guarantee one thing. Someone will take it seriously, someone will go too far. Someone will not know how to stop, and by the time they say, this was supposed to be fake, the experience won't care. Because the scariest part of all of this isn't demons. It's how comfortable people have become turning the unknown, knowing into content. You don't need hell to ruin someone. You just need clicks, darkness, and a camera rolling at 3 a.m. And history says that combination never ends well. The Ouija board itself isn't evil. The doors you open are. Or the doors you could possibly open. The cardboard isn't haunted, the ink isn't cursed, the planchette isn't alive. There's no demon hiding in the box like a jack-in-the-box waiting to pop out when Target closes. The board is nothing, dead material, wood, pulp, and plastic. If it sat alone in a warehouse forever, nothing would happen. Because the board doesn't do the work, you do. You create the permission. Not with belief, with attention. You create the vulnerability, not with fear, with focus. You create the opening, not with words, with posture. The moment you sit down and wait for something else to move first, you change your internal hierarchy. You tell your mind, your body, your instincts, I am not the authority here. That's the transfer. That's the handshake. That's the permission slip nobody realizes they signed. The board is just a tool that helps multiple people synchronize that state at once. That's all it does. It lines the mind up. It quiets noise. It narrows attention. It introduces expectation. Expectation is powerful. Expectation primes perception. Perception rewires experience. That's not mysticism. That's neuroscience. And here's where it turns unsettling. Once attention is focused hard enough, long enough, repeatedly enough, the brain stops filtering. Normally, your mind throws away thousands of sensations per second. Tiny sounds, shifts in light, internal thoughts, dream residue. It filters them so you can function. But when you teach yourself to watch the dark, the filter loosens. And once the filter loosens, things slip through. Not necessarily entities, experiences. Thoughts that don't feel authored. Sensations without clear source. Images that surface fully formed. The mind says, that didn't feel like me. In the moment you label something as not me, you've created separation. Separation is the doorway. Because once something feels external, it gains authority. You start reacting to it instead of owning it. You don't say, I'm anxious. You say, something feels wrong. That distinction matters a lot. That's why people feel followed, not because something chased them, because they stopped identifying their inner signals as their own. The brain doesn't like ambiguity. It assigns agency. If a feeling doesn't feel self-generated, it becomes other. And once something becomes other, the relationship changes. You observe it, you wait for it, you listen. That's the second side of the door. Because the doorways don't just let things in. They let you lean out. Your attention starts living half somewhere else. Half in the room, half in anticipation. That's why nights change first. Because darkness removes visual anchors. Your mind fills gaps. Your body tenses, your awareness scans. You're no longer resting, you're monitoring. Monitoring is neutral. Monitoring feeds whatever narrative you're living inside. Fear grows in silence. So does obsession. So does belief. Once you've taught your mind to open like that, it doesn't close instantly. You can throw that board away, burn it, break it. It doesn't fucking matter. Because the doorway was never the object. It was the habit. The learned posture of openness. The learned waiting. The learned expectation of response. That's why people say, I got rid of it, but things still felt off. Of course they did. You didn't remove the door, you removed the sign. The structure is still there. And doorways have two sides. Something can come in, but you can also drift out. Out of certainty, out of grounding, out of psychological ownership. That's the danger nobody wants to name because it sounds less dramatic than possession. But it's worse, because it's quiet. You're still you, mostly. You just don't feel anchored anymore. And when a person stops feeling anchored, they start looking for something to explain it. And that's when belief hardens. That's when fear gets mythology. That's when the story takes over the experience. Not because something evil arrived, but because the door taught you how to stay open. And open minds are beautiful things until they forget how to close. You don't always control the doorway you open. Here's the truth. If the Ouija board is psychological, you're triggering your own mind to haunt you. If it's spiritual, you're inviting something ancient and opportunistic to step into your life. Either way, you lose. You don't get to control who answers. You don't get to set boundaries. You don't get to walk away clean. Humans crave the forbidden. We're creatures of habit. We poke the darkness because we want to see if it pokes back. And guess what? It does. It always does. Whether that's spiritual or psychological. And if you think the darkness isn't listening, say hello into a board at night, turn off the lights, place your fingers lightly, ask, is anyone there? And when something whispers back, don't act surprised. You invited it. This has been Daily Grind. I'm Stephen Daly, your host, reminding you to stop summoning shit you can't handle. Stay safe, stay aware, and stop opening doors you can't close. See you next time here on Daily Grind.